Someone once wrote, if you love Dodger baseball in Los Angeles, thank this woman. Well, the lady is here with us today, Rosalind, better known as Roz Wyman. Oh, how exciting to see you again, Roz.
Ross, it's so nice to see you and have you call. I haven't heard your good voice for a few years, and you look great. And I got to say hello to your good wife a few minutes ago. So it's really nice to do something with you again after all of these years.
Well, thank you so much. Before we talk about the Dodgers, I'd like to start with your family background. Very interesting. Your father was a Russian immigrant, came to this country as a stowaway. Tell us about that.
Well, my daddy was, first place, he was also a pharmacist many years. But what happened was he was a boy in Russia, and he didn't like as he grew up, he didn't like living in Russia. He didn't believe in it. He just knew he had to leave. And he was in his teens, Ross, and he and another kid went under a fence to get away from the Russian border. And they shot at him, and he ran, and they got in like the bushes and they hid. Then the soldiers left, and then they went and walked for hours and hit where there was a pier, and they stowed away on this boat, the two of them. They decided that if they could hide, that if they got out to sea, that they wouldn't be thrown overboard, the story goes. So my daddy ended up, he didn't even know where he was going, and he ended up in South America at the tip of the country.
Wow.
And he had heard Ross. I love telling this story. I haven't told it in years. He knew his cousin lived in New York, and he thought everybody in America was rich. And that if he could get to his cousin, he would be a rich man. He could live with him and etc. So they worked, and then he got onto another boat, and they got a job just cleaning up after everybody. It was horrible. But he landed in New York, went to his cousin's house, and they had a 1-bedroom house for like 5 people. And so my dad got a job cleaning up a drugstore, and they put a cot up in New York, and he would live there. And then he would go to I think it's the 92nd Street Y to shower in the morning in New York. And then he would go back to the drugstore and clean and do whatever he was supposed to do. And then he went to pharmacy school. So he became a pharmacist. My mother was incredible.
Well, she was a pharmacist too, wasn't she?
She was, and she, at the end of her pharmacy, after they owned 2 drugstores over a period of time, she gave her time at something called the All Nations Clinic, downtown Los Angeles, where she worked as a volunteer. But my mother was the politician in the family. And we listened to the Roosevelt fireside chats when he did those, FDR. My father would rest or go home maybe for lunch or something. And my mother got him to go one day, and she had planned that he wouldn't return until the next morning. And so she got banners that said Roosevelt and Garner for president and vice president. And she put it inside. There was a place where you walked up, and they used to keep all the supplies. And she put this banner across. And when my dad came in the morning, he said, "What have you done? We're going to lose customers. We can't have that up there." And in those days, if you were a Democrat, you were a communist. Just that simple. And my dad was petrified. I mean, this was a mom and pop drugstore. Had like 22 seats for a counter. My mom also would do a little cooking for that, as well as fill prescriptions. And my father said, "We got to take that down." And this was a line I learned. My mother said, "Oscar, it will stay up." And that was a line that was used many, many times in our family. She would guess who the boss was.
She had a Chicago background, didn't she?
She was a Cubs fan, a
Oh,
big Chicago Cubs fan. And that's why I love baseball as well. And her two brothers, you know how they play on weekends.
oh
And
yeah.
her two brothers joined some little baseball thing in their neighborhood. And so as the story goes, I was born, and my mother's first question was, "What's the Cubs score?" She didn't. She didn't say, "Was it a girl or a boy?" She wanted to know the Cubs score.
Oh,
So we had, though, as the Dodgers came, we had a little trouble with first game when the Cubs played. It was like the first time Sandy pitched, and my husband was a St. Louis Cardinal fan.
hmm.
And so we had a we had a little to do between the Cubs and the St. Louis Cardinals. But Sandy pitched one day, and and he watched, it was the Cardinals and the Dodgers. And my husband, we used to sit with Walter O'Malley,
Hmm.
and Gene just forgot himself, and Stan Musial was up too. And Sandy got him pitched. Obviously, Sandy's going to strike him out.
Yeah.
And so Sandy struck him out, and Gene stood up and applauded. And I said, "Well, we finally got you."
Well, you went to USC, and at what point did you decide to run for the city council?
Well, what happened was I became active in Democratic politics as a young woman. And I served on a committee that the city council was nonpartisan. It wasn't Democrat or Republican, it was nonpartisan. And I served with a group of people, though I had met kind of with politics. And there was an opening coming in the city council. And they asked me to represent youth on this committee to pick somebody to run in this seat. And I have to tell you, Ross, I was very vocal on this committee, I guess. And I kept asking lots of questions, and I really was a pain in everybody's neck. And finally we got through, and we didn't find a candidate they liked, the whole committee, this group of us. And they said, "You're a big talker here. Why don't you run?" I said, "How could I run? I'm 21 years old at that point." And then I said, "I can't run for this." And they said, "Well, you've been talking and you didn't like that one, and go ahead." And I said, "Well, I'll look into it." But I said, "It's a waste of our time." So I did look into it, and I found out what you had to do to file to get in. And I thought, "Oh, what the heck? I got nothing else to do at this point. I'll file." And Ross, we made it by like 10 minutes before the deadline.
Mm.
And then my campaign became kind of, after I won, it became kind of an epic campaign, what I did. And because I had no money and I had just friends, and I had been a Democratic National Committee woman for the Young Democrats. And then I had joined something with a Republican at USC. He was a Republican and I was a Democrat, and we put a club together in politics. And so then what I decided, my mother again would she'd get from the ice cream company or the pastries or whatever. And at night, when they closed the drugstore, she would have a card game upstairs where her signs were. And she would charge, think of what people are charging today, like $1. And
Uh-huh.
you got refreshments.
Uh-huh.
And so they took something off of every pot, though, on the card game. Some played bridge, some played poker. My mother was a great card player. And so they gathered a little money together, but what she did was she got things free from salespeople that came in, and they gave her tons of bars of soap and unwrapped soap. So it was just a bar with no wrapping. And she said, well, we could do something with it, can't we? And I said, well, what am I going to do? Walk around with a sweaty hand and hand out a bar of soap at the door? And so what happened, Russ, we got a little plastic. This was a business card size, the bar of soap. And we got a plastic. We put the bar of soap in the plastic, and I got a card, like a business card to slip in, and said, let's clean up the city of Los Angeles.
That's great.
And I handed door to door, and I walked about 7-8 hours a day. And nobody believed. And we made everything in the first campaign. And like my nephew would sell pollywogs for 15 cents. And this added, I ran about $2,500 in the first campaign. Nobody could believe it.
Did you have your USC classmates help you campaign?
Yes, because I graduated. They came, and when I was still living at home because my brother had returned from the service, and he needed all the money with kids, and so I was still at home. On Monday nights, we knew that I Love Lucy was on, and the friends from SC, and then on weekends, people would come from the whole state because I was national committee woman for the whole state of California, young Democrat. They would come, but on Monday nights, we always worked because I Love Lucy was on. And we knew if we went before Lucy or after Lucy, people were home.
Sure.
And we made everything. We made stickers to put on the door and say, we visited you. And it was run out of my home, my dining room. And I walked about 6-7 hours a day. And when I would hand a piece of literature to these people at the door, they just didn't, put it together. And then I'd be walking down and they'd yell and they'd say, is that you? And I said, yeah, that's me.
Did you also on those cards say, let's bring baseball to Los Angeles?
I did. I had this little card and I had a check off. The first line on one side was, let's clean up the city of LA, use my soap. And then the other side, I had like little issues that were in the city, like let's take care of the traffic in LA. And one of the items was bring Major League Baseball to Los Angeles. Ross, I figured, and I still say this to the day, Los Angeles would never be a first-class city if we didn't have sports, we didn't have arts, we didn't have things to offer people. So I spent a lot of time after that trying to get a baseball team.
Yeah.
I just thought you invited somebody and they just came. Boy, did I learn.
A woman had been elected to the Los Angeles City Council in 1915, and you became the second at the age of 22, the youngest person ever elected to the city council. Were you surprised you won?
Yes and no. It's a strange answer, but we had worked so hard and did old-fashioned campaigning, door to door and phoning, way back then. And when everybody would come after they did their precinct work, they would say the address, and if they talked to somebody, and if they thought they had a chance. And so what happened in the primary, there was always a group, and in LA, there was the City Hall and the LA Times picked the winners always. And I didn't have the LA Times, and I just had my friends. But what happened was in the primary, I ran, obviously there was two of us left. So what I did was, and in the primary, I said alphabetical, I was last because I was Weiner then, Wiener. And I said, the bottom of the ballot, but the top in your heart. It was all these crazy things we did. And I ran second to the man at the time said would be elected. And there was another paper called The Mirror that the Times owned, and they endorsed him. And City Hall was basically controlled by the LA Times in those days. And so we knew, but at least I had a shot. And so then we went to get endorsements from the primaries to the general. And on election night, we counted every precinct, and we knew how it voted when it closed because they have to list it outside. And in those days, there was a very famous man who always did City Hall elections from City Hall. And he kept saying, they're called bulletins that come in that were given to him. Well, nobody figured I had a chance. So he didn't know me from a hole in the wall. And it came in, and the bulletins came in, Ross, and I was first, but he was convinced that it was wrong, that was handed to him. So for hours, 2-3 hours, he said, Mr. Marshry gave him my numbers. He just reversed them. And then we said something's wrong because we had done every precinct and we knew what we had that night. This was the night of the election. And so we sent somebody downtown. And in the interim, Mr. Michike put his hand over the microphone and he said, I've been doing these bulletins. Who is this Weiner thing on? Who's this Weiner here? And so they had no background on me because nobody figured I would win. And he said, somebody get me something on her. So we sent our friend down to the city hall to tell him, you're not doing this right. And he was a young lawyer. It was his first big case down in City Hall, we always said. And he went right up to where he was broadcasting and said, you're not giving our candidate the right numbers. And it's all taped. And I just lost it when I moved from my house and got married and went to my own house. And he then had to say, well, for gosh sake, somebody get me something about this person. And so my first election night was like that. And obviously we won, and we won very comfortable. It wasn't great, but it was good enough to win. That's the story of election night in my campaign.
Right.
But the soap thing really got everybody to clean up the city of LA. They loved the bar soap. And then one other thing, when you used to have those like cellophane thing to clean your glasses.
Yeah.
Well, she got those free too. So we decided, now what are we going to do with those? So we put another slogan. We said, if you want to see the city of Los Angeles clearly, use our life, our save, or whatever those things are called. And so I ran the first part of that campaign on $2,500. Think of that today.
That was in 1953. When did you start to talk about bringing Major League Baseball to Los Angeles?
Probably my first speech on the city council floor. I really thought it was really one of the issues. And as I say, Ross, I didn't understand what went into getting a baseball team at all. I just thought you wrote a letter and said, come to Los Angeles. I didn't know the baseball rules. I didn't know anything. All I knew was that I thought it was important for Los Angeles to become an important city. We had no baseball in all the state of California. And when the Dodgers came, it opened San Diego, it opened Oakland and the Giants and all of that. I read a story that the Braves had moved.
Yeah.
And that was the first kind of movement of a major team. And I thought, maybe there is some hope in this. So I started to follow every team what was going on with them.
Mhm.
And could we, and I thought they have to, I'm not building a stadium. I never even thought about that. I never even thought where they would play, obviously. And so I kept following it. And then a story hit me that O'Malley was having trouble with a man named Moses in New
I remember
York,
Moses. That's
who
right.
was the commissioner, and he was very, very powerful. And that O'Malley wanted to move the Dodgers to one of these spots. And every time he wanted to move, Moses said, his name was Moses, he said, no, you're not going there.
Yeah.
And O'Malley, I kept watching the stories, and I figured, oh, there's no chance in a million to get the Dodgers. But I thought, what the heck? I keep, reading all about it. And then it came up that he didn't have parking. And then it came up that, I kept reading all these stories. Then I had to go to a meeting in New York, and I wrote him a letter, famous O'Malley Wyman letter. And I said that I had put in a motion, an official motion, that we should bring baseball to Los Angeles. I didn't say Dodgers, I just said baseball. And O'Malley either had read it later, it seemed, or somebody had filled him in on it. And we wrote, and I said I was going to a meeting in New York with Councilman Roybal, and that could we stop and visit with him? And I got back a letter. I wish I had it in my hand to read to you, but that letter was terrible. And it said, I am in preparation for a World Series, and I am too busy to see you people, period. It was like that. And so I thought, well, that was a good idea, down the drain. Some reason I just didn't give up on the Dodgers possibly moving. And I thought, the day of the vote, I still didn't think they would move because O'Malley's were such New Yorkers. But Ross, I just kept on it. And then I had an ally, Kenny Hahn, was a supervisor, and he had been interested in it. And I needed help. And believe it or not, O'Malley comes to town, and I on another, not in the city when he came to visit. And so Kenny, I was always grateful to Kenny. He said, he wants to see some sights about LA. And they took Walter up in helicopter. And the great line in the flight was, what is that down there? And that was Chavez Ravine, which was almost cleaned out by then. And that's a whole complicated story.
Yeah.
But anyway, Kenny called me when they landed, and he said, well, O'Malley was interested in Chavez Ravine. He had looked at it, and he had the eye for what building, and he had always said that he wanted his own stadium. He wanted to build a stadium, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was the beginning of hope, just hope. And then we started talking, and we started negotiation. And O'Malley sent a team, was his team. There was a man who was in charge of it and then helped run the stadium. You probably know his name as well as I do. He was with Walter O'Malley's family came, a brother-in-law, as I recall it. But the other man was Dick Walsh. Dick Walsh. Remember Dick Walsh?
Yeah,
anyway, sure, he then kind of ran the stadium a little bit. So anyway, we started negotiations then. And we also, I thought everybody will just love this team. But we had a referendum. We went to a vote.
Yeah.
And I always said if Vince Scully hadn't said that, it hadn't been a day game. And Vince Scully says, and we go to Chicago. Barely won that vote. It was close enough.
The most fans that the Dodgers ever drew in Brooklyn was 1,000,000 800,000 in 1947, but they barely got to 1 million in 1957 when you made your move. Now, Walter O'Malley knew that baseball would never approve the Dodgers coming west by themselves. They had to have somebody come with them. So he approached the owner of the New York Giants, Horace Stoneham, and Stoneham at that time was seriously thinking about moving from New York to Minneapolis. And Walter convinced him that California was a far better option. And he told Stoneman, and he was so canny in doing this. He said to Horace, "You know what, Horace? I'll even let you have the Giants taken to San Francisco, and I'll settle for Los Angeles." And and Horace loved that. And I always thought this was great. I figured this up, Roz. After the teams got out here to California, the Dodgers outgrew the Giants in attendance each of the first 42 years and 56 of 62 now overall, including 14 of the last 16. But Walter was very crafty, wasn't he?
Let me, Ross, add to that story. It wasn't exactly that easy, let me tell you. The St. Louis Cardinals was the furthest team west.
Right.
And Major League Baseball, the owners said, we're not sending the Dodgers out for 3 games and turn around and send them back.
Yeah.
And we're going to make O'Malley pay. Well, you know, Walter wasn't about to pay that. So they said we should try to get another team to come. Now, he had talked to the Stoneham, but we started talking to Stoneham. And I made a lot of calls. I knew the people who were running San Francisco. And I also knew some people who were very rich. And I called a man named Shorenstein, who had the biggest building in San Francisco. And I said, "You want a baseball team?" And he said, "Why would I want a baseball team?" He said, "That'd be the dumbest thing I could do." And so we made a lot of calls around. And then Walter then was pushing Stoneham as well. But it wasn't, and we said when we negotiated that Stoneham got a deal, the ballpark, obviously Candlestick Park, and it was built. And he got concessions and he got parking and he got this and that. And at one point in the negotiations in LA, O'Malley's people said we were having troubles, real troubles in the negotiations. And we'd asked us a very prominent citizen named Chad McKellen to come in. He had been in the Eisenhower administration, lovely man, to kind of help us. He was respected in LA because, you know, I had to get all the sports writers, I had to get and I used to talk to him once a week at least. But during the negotiations, we had this giant thing going. And as we said, we didn't know if Walter was very active in the owners, thank goodness, because they were tough about this 3 games. They really wanted that team to move. And so during the negotiations, we stopped at one point. This Mr. McKellen came in to help us. You know, you always kind of bring in a citizen who's respected to add to it. And he said the negotiations stopped almost. And O'Malley said, "I want what they've got in San Francisco." And even though I knew he wanted to build his own ballpark, and I said, "I'm not building a ballpark. Because I can't tax that land then. I can't get any money out of it. And I'm going to tax those people. It's like the Coliseums of LA. It's public property. You can't tax them for that. If we owned it and built it, wanted O'Malley to build it, that was one thing. So we kind of stopped in the negotiations a little bit. And then I said, I will not agree to anything about Candlestick Park's agreement. I said, you know, this building, you said you wanted to build it and you're going to build it. And I said, if I walk, you guys got trouble. And it was close at one point. And I as I look back now that I'm 90, it was my, I don't know, I was so tough then. Anyway, we stopped for a few days in the negotiations. And then we got put back together, but we also found that there was somebody, Ross, I don't know if you know this, who was, that when we had the referendum and there
Yeah.
was money spent, and we couldn't figure out who was paying for that.
Yeah.
And there was a few council people who didn't want the Dodgers.
Huh.
And we didn't know that they had become friendly with a man who owned a team in San Diego. And he paid for all this anti-Dodger stuff. We later found that out. And
Mhm.
he wanted a baseball team in San Diego. He almost went to jail. He gave money to Nixon improperly. And I was so happy later to find out that. I wish he'd gone to jail. But anyway, we couldn't figure out where this money was coming, and we didn't know there was a guy in San Diego who was trying to get a team.
Wow.
That's a story you didn't know, I bet you,
That's
Ross.
right. That's right. So the Dodgers opened their Los Angeles stint in 1958 at the Memorial Coliseum, but the problems were not over, Roz. Proposition B was brought before the voters in June that year. What was Proposition B?
Proposition was very simple, not to have a baseball team in Los Angeles. They didn't want the taxpayers' money to pay for a stadium. And the taxpayers weren't going to pay for the stadium. I mean, Ross, we spent a lot of time on that. We had a telethon, and we got all the movie stars to come and talk and how important it was. And I had met, as I said, with the sports writers for months on end. When I first started, knew we might have a chance to get a team, and we got every sports writer. And then we went and got the citizens of Los Angeles. We got the Chamber of Commerce. We said how good the business would be, et cetera, et cetera. But it was clear that if we lost, that was the end of baseball in LA, basically. Yeah. And it was scary. But as I say, that if we had not had a day game, I always said it when Vinny announced, and the first when they came here, they ended up being seventh. And if you didn't think people hated me then.
Right.
And then we would walk down in the Coliseum, Mally and us, and we'd sit together. And as we went down, we got booed. And so Walter then moved our seats, and we built something at the entrance where they run in, and we sat there for the next. But we went from seventh to go to the World Series. And,
that's right.
And Scully, as I said, Scully said it was a day Chicago game. We were so glad Chicago didn't play at night. And you know what happened in this town? And I still believe it. Los Angeles was so spread out between the valley and the Boyle Heights area and the beach areas. We never rooted for anything. And that day, the horns all over Los Angeles people start tooting their horns. Everybody listened to Scully. Everybody was in love with Scully with your radios. If Scully said, let's sing, everybody in the stadium would start singing. And at the Coliseum, they would just start singing. Scully was so important to this town. We had great ball players, but I have to tell you, Scully was as important, or maybe more important, than a lot of our ball players.
Yeah. Well, 2 days before the election, they had a 5-hour television marathon, and many of the celebrities came by and urged passage. And some people say, Roz, they think that made the difference too.
Well, O'Malley and I thought it made the difference. We often talked about that over the years. And we had a lot of help, and we had every star that you could ever think of who was willing to offer to help. And we had politicians. We had both sides. We had Democrats and Republicans. We were just taking anybody who had a name. And we had a great telethon, by the way. We had singers, and we had, you name it, we had them. And that helped. And we had some good ads. We had a really first-class campaign was put on. And if we hadn't done all of that, we might have lost that election. And
Yeah.
if we did, it might have been the end of baseball for us in Los Angeles.
677,000 votes were cast. You won by 25,000 votes.
That's nothing, as you know, in an election.
Well, it was a personal triumph for you too, Roz. The Los Angeles Times named you Woman of the Year in 1958. Little League Field was named after you. They had a Roz Wyman Day at Dodger Stadium. In fact, they had a bobblehead doll with your name. It was given away. So you were so instrumental, and you wanted to be loyal, so you remained attached to the Dodgers. And I think you purchased, 8 season tickets?
I did. And I bought my tickets and paid for them all those years. But I sat with the O'Malleys, and O'Malley was the best host. O'Malley and I like to eat rich things like ice cream and cakes. And when I went to the box, I always brought something. And Walter would say, "What do you got, Roz? What do you got?" That's rich. And neither one of it. And on my 50th birthday, Kay O'Malley was just a doll.
Yeah,
and they went and got 50 Sundays at Baskin Robbins. And that was a thing that I could go and give 50 Sundays at Baskin Robbins.
Did he teach you about ham in some way?
No, he taught me, though, what the signs were. He had all these signs that he would have, and he told me that you didn't, if we won, you didn't change your clothes. It would be bad luck, but you could change your underwear.
Wow. When Dodger Stadium opened in 1962, Walter O'Malley did something that was very special to you.
Yes, he did. It was probably cry. At 90, I can cry. But anyway, we were going to have a dinner in the club, and we were going to break the club in. And he asked me to come an hour ahead of time. And he said that my husband, should go directly to the club. And I said, "You didn't want Gene to come with me?" He said, "No, he didn't want Gene to come in with me." So I met Walter, and we sat together. And he had this great model that Mervyn LeRoy had made, a great director, producer, and the studio had made this, and it was in front of him. And we talked about the things on the model. And I thought, fine, let's go to dinner already, And so he thanked me most profusely from all that I had done. And he said, "I want you to come out and let's look at the stadium." Nobody was there, just the stadium. And he had played for me, take me out to the ball game. And the two of us alone walked from his office to the dining room. And tears, of course, were coming down my eyes. And I loved Walter O'Malley. He was really, really, and so was Kay O'Malley, and of course Peter and the whole family. Then later I knew and learned to know them very well as part of the family. And it was a very special night for me, to say the least.
Yeah.
And it was very thoughtful, very thoughtful.
Roz, the Dodgers were not a huge success early. Their first 4 seasons at the Coliseum, they averaged 26,000 fans per game. But their popularity grew at Dodger Stadium, and in 2019 came within 26,000 of going to the 4 million mark. Amazing.
Yes. I have often said, which was true, that nobody had to buy a ticket. And O'Malley said he wasn't sure if baseball was going to be successful here. he said, I'm a New Yorker on this phone call. And, if I could get my deal here, I still might do that. It was the day of the vote. And I had all these great arguments about the taxi cabs and the restaurants and the this and that. And all I could think of on this phone was, I said, you won't have rainouts. You won't have to have two double headers. And he often reminded me of that. And I wish I could tell you the facts today, but I think we probably had no more than 18 since they've been here rainout. So I at least was right on that point.
That's right. And most of them are in April. Half of them have been in April. That's right. Roz, did you have a favorite Dodger team?
Well, obviously the great infield I loved, but I was in love with Sandy Koufax like everybody else, and I loved Don Drysdale. And I put together a political show, believe it or not, and I had the wives of, and Don's wife at that point went, and John Roseburg's wife went, and but the infield. But there was a very moving moment once I was in Vero Beach, and Roy Campanella came in after the first time he'd come back to the ballpark or Vero Beach or anything, and he was in his wheelchair.
Yeah.
And it was so incredibly hard on everybody who had gone to meet the plane. And Walter had a little camera and took a picture, and everybody said Walter never takes pictures, but he took that picture. And Roy Campanella coming off. And I often thought I would have loved to see Jackie Robinson play, and I was so sorry that I didn't see Roy Campanella.
Does one game stand out in your mind when it comes to the Dodgers?
Well, we had obviously a no-hitter, Sandy, that game. And I think I have a ball from Sandy from that. I still have a ball from that game. And I saw more than one no-hitter from Sandy, but I also remember Don broke a record one night, and I can't tell you what night it was, but he had broken a pitching record. And that was a very special night for me as well. And a lot of my special nights seem to be around pitching for some reason.
Yeah. Don set the record for most consecutive scoreless innings at 58 2/3 innings. It stood until Oral Hershiser beat it by getting to 59 innings. And that story is great, Roz, because when he got to 58 2/3 innings, he told Lasorda, take me out of the ball game. I don't want to break the record. I want to tie it. And Tommy said, no, you're going to finish. And Don said later, if I'd been down there, I would have told Oral, you get back out there, or I'll take you out there myself, because it's important that you break my record.
As I say, I saw in a lot of ball games, and I do remember that was very important to me. And Sandy's no-hitters.
Sandy had 4 no-hitters, and one was a perfect game. And one of his no-hitters came on a night when Bob Henley of the Cubs only gave up 1 hit, and the hit didn't figure in the scoring, but the Dodgers won the game on an error 1-0.
Yes. But that was a great infield we had with Say, Russell.
Garvey, Lopes, Russell, and Say.
They were wonderful as well.
They've got the major league record, and it'll always stand 8.5 years together. I don't think it'll ever be broken, Roz, because of free agency. Players just don't stay together that long anymore. Do you go to many games?
I go to a lot of games. And I can't wait to get back to the stadium of all times to win after all these years. And we weren't at home. It's just awful. Yeah. But I will return to my seats. I've had them since obviously we opened. Oh, and O'Malley, by the way, Walter, I wanted to sit across on first base side so I could look into the Dodger dugout.
Yeah.
And Walter explained to me, a Dodger fan. Now, this is brand new when I bought my seats, obviously. And he says, you sit behind the Dodger dugout. That's where they sit. And I said, okay, Mr. O'Malley, I will sit there. And we did. But I'll tell you, our visits together up when we'd play and our desserts. And then I would get up when I was nervous and stand by him where he sat at the end, and we would chat. And Kay O'Malley, in fact, Terry, this whole family. By the way, Terry, when she first came, she said she was going to get married and have a ball team. And she not only had the 9, she had a pinch hitter. She got 10. And they're a very, very special family. They really are. They were reared beautifully. They were not spoiled. And she came out, as his secretary. And so, it's really that family is quite special.
Yes.
And it's certainly been run through my whole life. And I was very honored that they honored me by putting at the Rancho Park scoreboard, the Wyman scoreboard. And that was nice. And the Dodgers were involved in that. So I've had a great time with them, to say the least. But I'll tell you, I get blamed. And when they first came, Ross, it was terrible. We ended up being 7. And I'll tell you, people were ready to send me out the city and never talk to me again. So we finally came around. And, nobody had, as I say, nobody had to buy a ticket. And
Yeah.
Mr. O'Malley, Walter used to say, first he said, I don't know if baseball will be successful. We had the Hollywood Stars. Did you ever go to those games?
Yes, I went. And in fact, one summer, my family was on vacation coming from Oklahoma. And I believe at that time, the Hollywood Stars, Bobby Bragan, I think, was the manager. And they wore white shorts for the game. Do you remember that?
Yes. Well, they had starlets running around out there too. And that used to be a big game when the Stars used to play at Dodger Stadium. It's not very big anymore. But they were never really what you'd call a big smashing hit in Los Angeles.
Right.
And so, as I said, Mr. O'Malley, the day that I had it's a whole story, but that I had to go take the phone call about whether he was going to come or not. And I thought, what are we getting into here? And the mayor was ready. The mayor wasn't sure about this at all. He said, you dragged me into this thing. And you didn't even get his promise that he was going to come ahead of time. I'll tell you, there's story after story involved with me and the Dodgers.
Roz, it had to be special this past year to see this team that had gone 32 years without a world championship be able to do it under such adverse situations.
Yes, absolutely. But when I go to my seats, Ross, everybody kind of knows me, and they'll ask me, "Can you get my seat fixed? It's broken." Why do they don't have parking that you can get out of this place? And I want you to know, my seats in Dodger Stadium, you'd think I was running that place, which I'm not. But my neighbors who sit around me keep me very busy as well. And I'm so glad to share with you today. And I wish you good luck in this enterprise after all of these years. You were a good companion with Scully. And Scully is so special. As I said early on, he is very special to me too.
Roz, I've said this publicly, and it to me tells the story of Vin Scully. He broadcast the Dodgers games for 67 years. He and I were together for 28 seasons. I was with him in all kinds of situations. When people would come up, ask for his autograph, "Can I take a photo with you, Mr. Scully?" Then I'd like to tell you about the day when I was with my grandfather at Ebbets Field and we played Boston. And I know you remember that game. And in all of those years, Roz, I never saw Vin rude to one person.
Well, I believe it. I believe it. He is a special human being. He really is. And I'm lucky to know them, lucky to meet you. It's been huge part of my life.
Yeah.
In fact, I even found a Dodger shirt for you today. Anyway,
show us that Dodger shirt now. I want to. Oh, wonderful.
Dodgers all over the place.
There you go.
They're all Dodgers.
That's right. And you got the picture of Dodger Stadium behind you. Tell us some of your Tommy Lasorda stories.
Well, Tommy, of course, was the character of characters. And I'll start with at Vero Beach. I would go to Vero Beach, now and then when they were there. And I would usually have breakfast with Tommy. And we were in the dining room. And one day, Tommy Davis came by and said, "Good morning, how are you?" etc. And we chatted. And I said, Tommy, I would like you to do for me what that little boy had who was in the hospital. They told a story about Babe Ruth. He said, "I will do a home run for you." I said, "Tommy, how about today you promise me in front of the manager here that you will give me a home run?" And Tommy said, "I almost want to bet on this thing," but he said, "Okay, Tommy, will you do it today?" And Tommy said, David said, "Absolutely." So we went, and in those days, there was a little bench, and the people sat right behind it. And once or twice, Tommy let me do the signals, and I love to steal. And he always said, I let you do those signals, and then from third base coming in, you're going to get my players killed. But anyway, guess what happened that day? Not one home run, but 2 home runs.
Oh.
And all I said, I wanted to bet you. And I lived over that. I didn't make the bet with him. Then when Tommy, I had some funny stories with Tommy. Well, and I'll just tell you a couple. But remember he was selling something to lose weight? He had a diet thing.
Right.
Well, my seats before they changed them were right. I'm in the stands, and my seats were right next to the dugout, and I could lean around and say to Tommy, "I got guests tonight. Can I have a couple of balls?" And he would pop out and say, "Okay, what do you need tonight, Wyman?" And so anyway, I said, "Tom, you look pretty good." I said, "Are you taking that stuff you're advertising, or are you just advertising it?" And he says, "No, I'm eating it." And he says, "Wyman, you don't look so good." He said, "I think I look better than you do." 5th inning comes. Guy delivers to me a case of the thing is what he's advertising. And he turned around and he said, "You get it?" I said, "I get it." And he said, "I want to see that yours look as good as I do." That's number one story. And the 60th anniversary of the Dodgers, and I was asked to go to the field. Vinny, there was some thought that Vinny would walk me out, but if he does it for me, then he's got to do it for a lot of people. And so we decided, whoever was doing this decided that Tommy would take me out. Well, Tommy and I were pretty old. This is one of the last thing I did with him. And we both walked pretty slow. And I said, "Tom, by the time we get out, the game's going to be over." And he said, "Well, let's go a little faster." So then we walk a little faster. But then I'm going to throw the ball in. My grandsons are standing there. We'd practice. Tom said, "Roz, you can't make it from the mound." And I said, "Tom, my grandkids are here. I have to make it." And he said, "Well, you should." He's now telling me how to hold the ball. I'm not pitching, you understand. This is going on as we stand in the middle of the field at Dodger Stadium. We're deciding how I should throw the ball. And Tom says, "Move up." And I said, "I can't move up. Then I will have to say I moved up." And he said, "Roz, you're not going to make it." And he had me a nervous wreck between the two of us. So finally I said, "Tom, I got to throw the ball pretty soon." And the crowd doesn't know what was going on, but this is going on the mound. So finally, I do throw the ball, and I make it. And
wow.
And I said to him, "Do I get credit?" He says, "No, I have to think about that." I said, "I want my credit." One other thing he did for me as a favor, I was doing a fundraiser in my backyard. And I had the owner of the Giants come down, and I said, I have found something that the Dodgers and the Giants can agree upon. And so I had this whole baseball thing in the backyard. And Tommy Lasorda said he would come to speak. And he was late coming. And Senator Feinstein was speaking. And Tommy, the only way he could get in was had to walk by the speaking place where she was speaking. And so she had met him before. And so when she saw him, she says, oh, well, hi, Tommy, how are you? Come on up here with me. So Tommy, of course, was ready to go. And I figured, oh, great, we're going to have some stories, etc. So the senator shows him her World Series ring from the Giants. Tommy looks it over up and down, and he says, it's not worth 10 cents. And it brought the place down. That was typical Tommy.
Yeah.
And then, I had some just wonderful stories with Tom. He was a dear man as far as I was concerned. And we often asked him to speak. He always would come to charitable things I asked him to do.
Yeah.
And I will miss him greatly. He was all, yeah.
We will all miss him. We will all miss him. And he had so many little jokes to tell, and he was so good at it. And Roz, my favorite one is this. Don't tell people your problem. 80% don't care, and 20% are glad you got them.
That's a good one. But he was a delight. And at Vero Beach, I had the best time with him always. I will miss him.
Well, Roz, anything else you want to add? It's just been delightful to have you with us, and I thank you for your time. It's just been wonderful to hear. You did such an excellent job in summarizing the Los Angeles Dodgers, and your role will always be remembered as, I think, pivotal in the fact that franchise came here.
Well, you're very kind, and I appreciate it. And Dodgers have been a big part of my life, Ross. Let me leave one story with you that I think is important. Again, the kindness of the Dodger family. I have a key that is framed in my den under Sandy Koufax's picture. And there's a letter from Peter O'Malley. And in it, he said, this key opens everything at Dodger Stadium. He said it was my dad's. And he said, I can only think of one person to send it to, and that's you. And that is framed in my den. And I have the key to Dodger Stadium that opens every door. And it's very meaningful to me as well.
Well, you have been marvelous today in recalling so many wonderful memories. And I can't thank you enough for the time you spent. You look wonderful. Blessings to you. And we hope to see you soon somewhere around Los Angeles.
Thank you very much, Ross, and good luck to you and your enterprise in this show. Be well, all of you.
Thank you. Pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.